I would rather be prepared than surprised. So if you own a JL Wrangler or a JT Gladiator, this might be for you. Electrical problems are not uncommon with Jeeps, and they can be really tricky to chase down. Thankfully, I was able to solve my problems by fixing their connections very easily. So hopefully you can get something out of this, and if you run into a similar problem, then maybe this will work for you. The particular instance I had was while driving at about 45 miles an hour, the Jeep decided to shut down on its own. I drive a manual, so I was able to stomp on the clutch, put it in neutral, and restart. Although it was unnerving that this thing happened several times at random intervals, not exactly the safest situation you could come up with. So when I took it home, I decided I would hook it up to my JScan app through my OBD port and see if I could pick up any error codes that could help me chase down the problem. And of course, there were no codes. Some of the electrical problems that you'll run into are either loose connections or intermittent things that your codes are not going to help you, unfortunately. So I decided to take a shortcut instead of spending some quality time with my voltmeter and test light and going through the entire Jeep. I decided to look at a couple of common fault points in the Jeep, and the first thing I hit was what's called the star connector, otherwise known as the CAN bus connector, which is in the dash. This particular connector is kind of a relay station for your electricity to go to the multiple modules throughout the Jeep that control its systems. So when this thing goes or loses connection, everything goes. So it'd probably be good to have a spare one of these in your glove box just in case. Apparently this resides close to the heater ducts, and the solder points can become weak and fail over time, and then you have no way to relay this electricity to the modules in your Jeep, which could be a bit of a problem. So I didn't have a spare CAN bus at the time. I have one now in my glove box, and I'll put a link down in the description for anything that I list here in the video, and the CAN bus is included in that as well. So I decided to take a look at it and see if it was possibly loose and it was just a connection issue. And actually that did the trick. So I'll show you how to do that. And the next problem I ran into was after that, after about 6 months of trouble-free driving, I had a loud static pulse through my stereo, which made me think that my engine was going to shut down, but it never happened. It was never more than just the audio. And I'll show you how to fix that too. That turned out to be a battery connection problem. Well, hopefully you can get something out of this, and just knowing what I did to solve this problem might help you get home if you run into one of these things. So in order to get to it, to clearly access it, you'll need to take the glove box panel off. So just open the glove box. You have this little arm on the side. You lift up toward you. It'll snap, and then it'll come straight out. And then there's a little tooth right here that you'll need to push back. And it pops down. You don't have to take it all the way off, but you could just pull it straight off here from the hinge, like that. So there's the CAN bus right there. If you do replace it, make sure you take pictures, notes, or whatever about what wires go where. It takes a mini screwdriver to get these things out, but the whole piece itself, this green piece, slides toward the driver's side and out. I'm a little superstitious, and I don't feel like taking this thing off if it's actually working, but all I had to do was slide it off, slide it back on. That took care of the problem. 6 months later, no electrical problems. I'd knock on some wood if there was some in here, but no luck. Anyway, that's the CAN bus. And to put the door back on, just repeat the process. Snap the hinge in. Get the tooth going there. And this little arm snaps into the hole and down, and you're back in business. So after about 6 months of being happy with myself for discovering that CAN bus connection problem, I wound up with a very unnerving issue with my stereo. There was a large static surge, the best way I could describe it, and it would just happen every once in a while, and it made me think the whole Jeep was going to shut down. Thankfully it didn't. So to me, this sounded like another connection issue. So I decided to check under the hood and see what I could find there. So if the forums have told us something at all, then chances are your battery issues might have something to do with your auxiliary battery, which lives in a little hole underneath the fuse location under the hood next to the battery. When that aux battery goes dead, it'll take the main battery with it. That's what happened to me on a trail, and I had to take care of all that stuff while teetering on two wheels. That was not a lot of fun, but thankfully my jump box saved me on that one. Anyway, my aux battery is gone. So what I've done is I've moved my negative terminal from the aux battery up to the negative terminal in the main, and the positive terminal from the aux battery to the positive terminal on the main. It's been like this for over 2 years and not a problem. One thing also I would recommend is that if you do have a mysterious loss of power, or as I found out, I had a surge of static through my radio and it sounded like everything was going to go blank, but it all came back. It was because of my ground, and it was actually specifically the negative connection on the battery was slightly loose. Once I tightened that up, no problems. I also noticed that the positive head comes slightly loose as well. I do a lot of driving on gravel roads like many of us do. I don't know if that's what it was, so I would check that from time to time, and if you do get that static surge, definitely check your connections and also your battery ground. Also, right down here, there's a grounding point. Make sure all these things are nice and tight. Any of those things are possible reasons why you could have an electrical problem or surges. Also, one thing that's been pretty well publicized is your fuses, your relays, and all those things that are located here in this box can be not seated down tightly as they should be. So it wouldn't hurt from time to time just to pop that cover off and just make sure everything is seated up there nicely. I find that every once in a while, quite a few of these are a little bit loose. Does that cause a problem now? Probably not, but I think it would be better if they were seated like they were supposed to be, just to keep the demons at bay. So a lot of the time when you're on the trail, you're not carrying this stuff. I mean, you could test this, and if you're really savvy with it, you can learn a lot. Sometimes these errors, and by the way, none of these errors I'm showing you today through codes, sometimes they can. Sometimes you can track it down with something like that. Other times you can take a bit of a shortcut. And like I mentioned, my errors didn't show codes, but if they did, my OBD-Link MX Plus and my JScan would take care of that. Now this is a pretty simple process. This is an OBD scanner, basically that'll read codes. You plug it into your OBD port down here. It pairs by Bluetooth to JScan, and you can read codes to your heart's content. Another thing about this too is JScan will actually do other things. Not as much as the Tazer. It won't disable your electronic stop-start. I use a smart stop-start for that. Check out my other video for that one. But what you can do with the JScan is you can adjust your tire size, you can adjust your gear ratios, lots of things that the Tazer does at a fraction of the cost. But like I mentioned, it doesn't do the cool stuff like the Tazer, like the pin code for the start immobilization, the light show, and a lot of other things like that. But it's a great tool for what I needed it for. And it actually let me adjust my tire size once I upgraded that to get my speedometer accurate. So if you just want to throw parts at a problem, sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes if you don't know how to use this, or you don't have the time to do it, sometimes replacing some of these things like the star connector, otherwise known as the CAN bus, and working up under the hood and looking at connections and fiddling with that is about all you have. So the JScan talks to your Jeep by way of the OBD port. So it works with a Bluetooth adapter. This is the OBD-Link MX Plus. There are several other versions that work with it as well. This one works fine for me. This is what you'll use to read from the Jeep. If you want to write to the Jeep, you have to bypass the secure gateway module. And it is very hard to get to. I actually mentioned this in my smart stop-start system video. I wound up putting some extension cables in so I didn't have to squeeze my hand up into there to plug it in, because if your hands are any bigger than a toddler's, good luck getting your hands up there and plugging those things in. Once you get the extensions in, you can let those hang under your dash and then plug this in. This is the bypass cable that you'll plug your OBD connector into, anytime you have to make updates to your system, like change the TPMS PSI limits, change your tire size, change your gear ratios, and whatever else JScan is going to do to change your alarms, limits, and sensor settings. So hopefully you found this video helpful, and with any luck, it'll get you out of a jam. Anyway, I really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you out there.